Hello, everyone. I'm Ari Povich. Welcome to A Current Affair. The First Baptist Church in Hammond, Indiana, is a multi-million-dollar operation. The Hammond, Indiana Church boasts of having the largest congregation in the country. One thing they're not proud of, however, is the battle between their pastor and one of the parishioners. Our John Johnston tells us the pastor is accused of having an affair with the church member's wife and keeping the same man locked away in the basement, praying for an end to all the sins he saw around him.
Welcome back to part 2 on my series of the First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana, and the OG of Christian grift and greed, Pastor Jack Hyles. Now, that opening clip pretty much in a nutshell explained what episode 1 was about, but I'm going to link episode 1 above. I'll put it in the show notes too. So if you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch part 1 and then come back to this one. Part 2 of this is even more sordid, more crazy, and more wild than part 1. And stay to the end because I'm going to tell you exactly what all the people involved in this nasty little story are up to today. All right, so let's get started. In part 1, I talked mostly about Victor Nischik. We talked about his relationship and what he went through. But in this episode, I'm going to talk more about the affair between Pastor Jack Hyles and Victor's wife, Jenny. Now, Pastor Hyles went to his deathbed denying that he had an affair with Jenny or any other woman for that matter.
Nischik claims Hyles not only controlled his wife, but every aspect of their lives.
It was down to the minute and the hour when I would come and go and when she would come and go. And it all worked into our responsibilities at the church so that people would not question why these two were never together.
Mrs. Nischik is a member of my staff and has been for over 25 years, a faithful, loyal member of our staff. I am her pastor, her employer, and her friend. And that's all. Nothing more. Nothing more. Is there or has there been? Mrs. Nischik is one of the most proper women you'll ever meet in your life. And it's tragic for an innocent woman to be scandalized by a womanizer.
But the evidence is overwhelming. Take a look at this clip.
Jeannie Nischik would not meet with us, but did sign these letters for Pastor Hyles, supporting what he said.
My accusation is of tampering with my home, from stealing my wife's affection, and total, complete mind control. And I was controlling our lives to the nth degree. This was the extent of my accusation. But I will not go insofar as sexual because I never caught them in bed together.
Despite saying that, Nischik claims Hyles offered to swap wives.
He said, if you want her for the same relationship I had with Jenny, you have my permission. And I told him that he was a sick person.
I could not tell you how I felt when he dared to say that my wife would even consider such a thing.
Did you notice how Hyles went on and on about how his wife would never consider something like that? So I find it interesting. I think that if most men, if they were confronted with this, would say, I would never do something like that. I didn't say that. Instead of going on and on about their wife wouldn't do that. You notice he never says, I wouldn't do that. He just says his wife wouldn't do that. But how prude could his wife have been? There's records that show in 1971 that Hyles took Jenny and 2 other women to Hawaii with him, where they stayed in the same hotel. And guess who didn't go? Beverly didn't go, nor did any of their children go, and neither did any other men go. And here is what Linda, that's one of Jack and Beverly's daughters, said about their marriage. She says, my dad lived a double life, one of religious family man and dynamic speaker in the public eye, but one of sordid sexual secrets privately, secrets that only my siblings and me and my mom knew. He hated my mom, hated her, treated her terribly, abused her, and even turned his own children against our mother. We hated her. We told her she was crazy. We thought to make him happy, we'd hate her too. But I guess a trip to Hawaii doesn't necessarily prove an affair. Neither does having a bad marriage, I suppose, conclusively prove that you're having an affair. But Victor did find several letters that Jack had written to Jenny stating his undying love, and she was the only woman he loved, and little secret meeting places that they had, which kind of is odd because he is not accusing them. Did you see in that clip that he said he's not going to accuse them of a sexual affair? Come on, dude, don't be so daft. But not only that, now Jack and Jenny had offices right next to each other. She was his secretary. And several church members, including deacons, Jack's own daughter, Linda, one of his daughter in laws, testified that they had a secret door in between their offices, that they had a drape that covered it so that no one could see when she would go into his office or he would go into her office. So, and he thought they were being real slick by putting a drape over it. But not only that, Victor said in court under testimony that Jack had given Jenny tons of money and gifts. So I'm going to put a partial list of what he had given her. He gave her a new automobile every other year for 18 years. That's 9 cars. He paid for the upkeep insurance on the cars. He gave her a loan for $35,000 so she could invest the money. Remember, this was probably in the 70s or 80s, so that was a lot of money. A gift of $10,000, again, a lot of money. He put new siding on the Nischik's home. He paid $11,000 for the room to be built over the garage for Victor to live in. We talked about that in episode 1, the room above the garage that Victor was living in. He put a new HVAC system in their home. He gave the Nischik's daughter $5,000 for school, and he paid for a second telephone in Jenny's bedroom. And that's only what we know about and what Victor knows about. We don't know if he was giving her jewelry and other things. He obviously was taking her on trips to Hawaii. Now, here's the really crazy part, though. The Nischiks had a very nice home in Indiana, but according to Victor, he wasn't allowed to pick the home out. He wasn't allowed to decorate it. He wasn't even allowed to look at a floor plan or put his name on the contract. Apparently, Jack did all of that with Jenny, and somehow she bought this very nice home on a measly church secretary's salary. Very interesting. And here's the funny part of that. The house was located on the street behind where Hyles lived. In fact, they were so close that they could see each other from the back. And the Nischik's daughter has testified that she saw them flipping lights on and off to each other to communicate. Now, following the divorce between Jenny and Victor, on her little church salary, secretary's salary, Jenny bought a beautiful brand new condominium. This was in 1986 for $150,000 in cash. How would she be able to do that? I remember back in the 80s, late 80s, I bought a very nice 3-bedroom home. It was lovely. For $80,000. So this $150,000 condominium must have been very plush and somehow paid for with cash, which leads us to the money. So let's talk about Jack Hyles and his money. Here is what Linda, Jack and Beverly's daughter, says about how they grew up. She says, I got to tell you, the money part of it was pretty nice. As a kid, I mean, think about it. Tithes and offerings from 50,000 people. Hello. It created a lavish lifestyle for our family. My father owned most of the city where the church was. He owned a college, 2 high schools, 2 grade schools, a cemetery, lots of buildings. He was very wealthy. And even into our adult years, he owned us. He owned our homes, our cars, our furniture. He owned our lives. And we didn't dare cross him because we were too afraid we would lose everything. But oh, the money trail gets more interesting. Remember in episode 1, I talked about how Jack Hyles had published over 50 books, but he did that with self-publishing. He didn't go through a big publisher. He self-published them with the Hyles Publishing Company. So he and Jenny, they would produce a book for $1 or $2, and they would sell it for 4 to 6 times that. And think about it. They also had a couple of thousand, 3,000 college students that they were forced to buy his books. His books that he wrote were part of the textbooks. So Jack, and probably Jenny too, made who knows, untold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars off these books. But he took the money in cash. He took that under the umbrella of the church tax-free status. He would take this money and he would lavish gifts on people. Of course, we know he was lavishing gifts on Jenny. But he would lavish gifts on other pastors, on people in his congregation, college kids even, so that he could curry their favors. I saw a thing where someone said he would do these little things called pajama parties. And these college girls would have to come in for pajama inspections in college. And they would line up and they would stand on the pews. And Jack and some other pastors would have to make sure that their pajamas were modest enough. And if they weren't, they had to strip down right there in front of them and change their pajamas. And the girls would be singing, "We love you, we love you, we've never loved anyone else." And they would call him Poopsie Whoopsie. And then Jack would hand out all kinds of cash for them to go get pizza and some soda and just have spending money. Isn't that gross? Hyles would get up on Sunday mornings and preach about how he only took a few measly $1,000 for his salary, and that he drove the church mail car, how humble he was. But he lived in a huge house in a very upscale part of town. He wore expensive custom-made suits like they always do. You ever notice that televangelists and mega pastors are always wearing, Italian handmade suits? And he, like I said, he would lavish cash and gifts on people. The other way that he got cash was he was invited to speak all over the country, as you can imagine, being one of the first mega pastors and superstar in the fundamentalist realm. And they would pay him a ton of money, always in cash. This part was always in cash. He would take the money and he would use it as a slush fund, never reported to the IRS, but it was always under the umbrella of tax-free money. Jack Hyles defenders, of which there's many, and you know what, even to this day, if you go online, there are people that still call him Brother Hyles and that he was smeared and it was all Satan's work and spiritual warfare and lies. He still has a lot of defenders. I would say, looking online from my research, I would say it's about 50-50. I do see quite a few people denouncing him, but I still see Christians that hold him up. And if you go look yourself, you'll see. I have all of my resources linked down below. So that is just gross. But they love to say, here's what they love to say, that when Brother Hyles died, he left all of his millions to the church and ministry, as if that's some kind of a flex. Think about it. He had to leave it to the church and ministry. Otherwise, everyone would know about his tax evasion. The church, probably his family, his estate would have been seized by the IRS. So he didn't have any choice but to leave it to the church, even though that's some kind of a big flex, they think. So silly. The bottom line is that even to this day, no one exactly knows where all of his money came from. No one knows exactly where it went to because there was no records kept. Hyles treated this church and the college and the schools and all of this, his book money and his honorariums that he got for speaking, a lot of that in cash. He used it like his own little sole proprietorship. He didn't have to account to anybody, which is so dangerous. I can't even believe a church of that size would let him get away with that, but they did. And unfortunately, Jack Hyles had a little mini-me, and that would be David Hyles. So that brings us to his son, David, who is probably, well, I'm not going to say probably, he's even worse than his father. A man by the name of Voyle Glover, he was an attorney and a longtime member of the church. And he became very disillusioned with what he saw. This was in the 90s. And he wrote a book, and it was called Fundamental Seduction, the Jack Hyles Case. The book, the 1990 book, it detailed the affairs, the money and tax evasion that he saw, and all the sordid details. And he ended up getting just all kinds of threats. Just abuse was just rained down on him. And here's what he said. He says, "I was called the Antichrist and worse," Glover said. "I was threatened with physical harm, death, and death threats." His office had been broken into. He was left with poop on his doorstep. So someone had came and left him a little package on his doorstep. And it's alleged, and pretty much been proven since then, that most of it, or a lot of it, came from David Hyles, probably from the direction of Jack. Because remember, nobody did anything unless Jack said so. So I'm guessing that Jack had David do all of this stuff to this poor man who wrote the book. By the 1980s, David Hyles was in his 20s, and he was, of course, the youth pastor now at the church. Of course, right? And he was found out to be having an affair. He was already married, but he was having an affair with a young daughter of one of the higher ups at the Hyles Anderson College. And there has been rumors and really allegations that have been proven that it wasn't just her, that he was messing around with a lot of the girls in the youth group. So the administrator said, I go or David goes. And I think he even threatened to expose this. So out of desperation, Jack decided that he was going to send his son down to Miller Road Baptist Church in Texas, where Jack had got his start. But that didn't work out very well either, because once he got down to Miller Road Baptist Church, he was exposed for having affairs with about a dozen women in the church. By this time, his wife Paula had divorced him. So David is now divorced. He's disgraced his father's old church, Miller Road Baptist Church. So he moves back to Chicago with a woman named Brenda Stevens. And they're not married, but they live together. They're living together. And in 1985, Brenda's son from another man, this is not David's son, but a son of a different man, was found lifeless in his crib. And he had bones that had been broken in various stages of healing.
David Hyles set out to follow in his father's footsteps, but his zest for women cost him his pulpit and his first marriage. When David left a Texas church in disgrace, he and his girlfriend, Brenda Stevens, moved to Bolingbrook, Illinois, with her 2 children by her first marriage. It wasn't long before her youngest son, 17-month-old Brent Stevens, came to the attention of abuse investigators. In 1985, they found him with a broken leg plus 8 or 9 bones in various stages of healing. Paul Cialino was a homicide investigator for the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. He and his team fought, unsuccessfully, to keep Brent away from David and Brenda.
I wasn't concerned the child was going to be abused again. I was concerned this kid was going to wind up dead. That was my concern.
His concern was justified. A few months later, Brent Stevens was found dead in his crib. Due to bureaucratic bungling, an inconclusive autopsy was done at a hospital instead of the morgue. But at the inquest, David Hyles invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Brenda, the mother of the dead child, was a no-show. As for the status of the investigation,
this case is an open case still today, and nothing's been done.
Isn't that just tragic? No one was ever held accountable for this. And doesn't it make you wonder if Jack got involved with the local authorities and had this kind of covered up? I'm not saying he did, but how was there no real investigation of this? It's just bungled, just really sad. But that's not all. So David marries Brenda, and they hightail it to Florida. They got to get out of town. So he ends up working at a large church in Pinellas Park, Florida, as the Sunday school coordinator or something like that. But it wasn't long before he was kicked out of that church for having more affairs with church women, manipulating and taking advantage of the women in that church. But before they left Florida, they had a son named Jack David. So by this time, they had another child. His name is Jack David. And before they left Florida, Brenda ran over this child in their driveway. She says it was an accident. It was ruled an accident. Nobody really knows, though. This is the second child that's been unalived by this couple the first one under very suspicious circumstances, and I would say running over your own child in the driveway is also really suspicious. So now they go back to Chicago. So Linda is the only one that actually left the fold. She is now an atheist, and here's what she has to say about her brother. She says, my brother became another version of my father. He pastored a church in Texas and was found to be having affairs with 14 different women. He divorced his wife and married one of the 14. That's Brenda. My father desperately tried to cover it up. He moved him to another church where he was found to have 17 affairs with different women. He had just recreated what he had seen my dad live, and my dad did nothing but cover it up. Believe it or not, we have another Jack coming into the fold. So this is the other Jack. And who was that? Well, Jack Hyles he died in 2001 after some complications of a heart surgery. But before he had died, he was smart enough to think about and decide who was going to take over for him when he died. He knew it wasn't going to be David, right? Even he was smart enough to know that David was not going to be able to take over this church. So he tapped the other Jack. That's Jack Schaap, and this was his son-in-law. This Jack Schaap had married Jack Hyles' daughter, Cindy. We don't know a lot about Cindy. I kind of researched her a little bit. I don't know a lot about her other than she stayed in the fold. And apparently Jack Schaap was just a little clone of Jack Hyles. So the apple did not fall far from the tree as far as Cindy was concerned. She kind of married her own father. When you watch old videos of Schaap walking out into the stage, you would see over-the-top cheering, almost like we were at a basketball game or something. And in the beginning, his sermons were very much like Jack Hyles' sermons. Basically, deriding people for not pleasing God. You've got to tithe. Pretty much all the standard stuff that you hear, women be submissive and beat your children, pretty much all of the things that you would expect. But over time, his sermons became R-rated and sexual. I know that sounds weird, but they were actually sexual. As Schaap began to really get a grip on the congregation, one of the former members said he became so brazen, so sexual, and so over the top that she had to stop taking her children because the sermons were not fit for children. Take a look at this.
Of course it hurts. Of course there's fire. Of course there's pain. Of course there's... Y'all just shut up. I can handle it. I know what I'm doing. Oh, God, that hurts. Oh, God, I'm so tired. Oh, God, I didn't want to lose her. Oh, God, I didn't want to have that pain. Oh, God, no. God, you love me so much, don't you? Yes. Oh, God, thank you for what you're making me. You're welcome.
Tom Brennanm, who is also a pastor and a former member of First Baptist Church of Hammond, says this. He says he was beyond the bounds of what was appropriate, says Brennanm. His preaching had gotten so, I hate to use the word, it was so vulgar sometimes that it was a grief to my spirit. And Linda Murphy, her name is Murphy, but Linda Hyles, who is Jack Hyles' daughter, she says the same thing. She says, I believe First Baptist gradually evolved into a cult that was in complete idolatry of my father, and after his death, complete idolatry of Jack Schaap. So Schaap would vacillate between scolding his flock for not tithing enough, for not volunteering enough, for not winning enough souls, vacillate into very sexual type of sermons. And in fact, he even compared the Lord's Supper to having sex. And here's what Tom Brennanm says. He would just repeatedly talk about sex and repeatedly talk about women, how they were dressed and body parts in graphic detail, recalls Tom Brennanm. And unfortunately, it went way beyond talk. In 2012, when Schaap was 54, he was married to Cindy, Jack Hyles' daughter, and had 2 children. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to taking a minor across state line for relations, making it a federal crime. So he was prosecuted under the federal statute of taking a minor across state lines, and he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Prosecutors say that he would be counseling these young girls and who knows doing what with how many of them. I've heard there was multiple, but this one particular girl, he ended up counseling her and, of course, manipulating her. And when he went across state lines, for some reason that makes it worse. I don't really know if that has to do with sex trafficking or something. I don't know. But in the event, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Now, I'm about to tell you what all of these people are up to now. But before we do, I want to give you a quote from Linda, who is the only one who was able to get out. And the reason I want to show you this quote is because it speaks to me as someone who grew up in my church wasn't this bad. We didn't have enough people to be this bad. And other than one youth pastor, I didn't have any pastors that prayed on me. I did have one youth pastor, but that didn't get very far. But in any event, I want you to see what she has to say. She says, I knew I wasn't going to be happy unless I was free. But I knew I wasn't going to be free unless I could muster up some courage and get out of there. I had to cling to and act upon that tiny shred of courage in order to finally leave a cult. The only friends I'd ever known, my childhood connections, my history, my family, knowing that in doing so, I would finally have what I'd longed for my entire life. And that was freedom and truth. Okay, so what happened to all of these characters in this sordid little tale? Well, Jack Hyles, he died in 2001 after a heart surgery. He died of complications, so no loss there, right? He left his millions to the church. Victor Nischik remarried a woman named Lenore and lived happily with her for about 15 years before he died. He wrote a book called The Wizard of God, and he died in 2015 at the age of 81. And remarkably, he stayed a Christian his entire life. If anything would have turned me off, you'd think that would do it, but no, he stayed a Christian. Jenny, his wife, details on her are really sketchy. I couldn't find anything much about her. The only thing that I could find is that she's probably still alive because I could not find an obituary. She was remarried and her last name is now Correll, Corle. And what I can see is that she's still living in Northwest Indiana somewhere, but there's no pictures of her. She's kind of gone into hiding. And then we have David Hyles. Okay, so David is continuing his evil ways. Of course, we know that, he was a disgrace. He fled Florida and he became something of a self-help guru, or he tried to in the 1990s. He had a little ministry called Fallen and Grace Ministries. And he was getting support from many different churches, this Fallen and Grace Ministries. That was until 2020. In 2020, a woman in her 20s, now he was 67 in 2020, he was 67. And this 20-year-old girl comes forward with photos of him and screenshots alleging an online affair with him. So once again, he goes into disgrace. But does that stop him? No, it doesn't stop him, because in 2023, David announced that with another disgraced pastor, Paul Kingsbury. I don't know about who Paul Kingsbury is. I should look into him. They were starting a venture called restorationcareministries.com, where disgraced pastors can purchase various courses from David and Paul to reconnect with God or something like that. And Jack Schaap, our last guy in here, he was released from prison in 2022, and his whereabouts are unknown. Just like Jenny, he kind of fled into the shadows, and we don't know much about him. So that's it for today. Give me a thumbs up if you like this. Tell me what you think about it, and make sure and watch part 1 if you haven't, and I will see you next time.